kick off. So welcome to this complimentary online lunch event brought to you by Matchboard and BPSA, which is South Africa's Industry Association for Globally Traded Services. This event is entitled How Many of Australia's Biggest Brands Are Succeeding with Customer Acquisition and Support from South Africa, and it'll run for about 60 minutes. During this time, we hope to spark your interest and engage you in a conversation around alternative approaches to acquiring and servicing customers from South Africa. We'll be kicking off with a keynote from Angelo Azar at Hollard Insurance, followed by an executive panel discussion. And to conclude, we'll have time for Q&A from the audience. So please think of your questions as we go along and feel free to make use of the chat functionality. I think you all know that I'm Sharon Melamed, Managing Director of Matchboard, and I'll introduce our panel shortly. But before I do so, and just while we're waiting for our last couple of people to join, some quick housekeeping. So firstly, we will be recording this event. However, please do not attempt to record the event yourselves. This is strictly prohibited. Secondly, if you have internet issues, use your mobile hotspot to log in again or dial in with the phone number that's included with your calendar invite. Finally, could I ask that you just turn yourselves on mute until question time to prevent outside noise for our speakers. Okay, so now I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker, Angelo Azar, Head of Operations at Hollard Insurance. Reporting to the CEO, Angelo is responsible for direct, partner, broker, supply chain, and third-party customer channels and operations. This includes sales, service, claims lodgement, home and motor claims, procurement, investigations, and quality assurance. His remit comprises about 650 FTE, with operations both internally and outsourced domestically and offshore. So over to you, Angelo, to the panel discussion. And it's my great pleasure to introduce the panel members. We have 4 companies in South Africa where I will just let you know it's 3:20 a.m. So I think they deserve an applause at the end of this session. So first of all, we have Daryl Marcus, who's Head of Business Development and CX Enabling Technology at Altron People Solutions. Howard Blake, who is the founder of the Blake Group. Martin Rowe, who is the Group CEO of CCI Global. And Robin Hoekstra, CEO of Outworx. Collectively, these 4 BPOs in South Africa employ more than 15,000 people in contact centers and digital operations. Their core agenda is to help their clients grow through cost-effective, outcome-focused acquisition and customer experience programs. So over the last 5 years, Australian businesses have had a lot of success, somewhat under the radar, with outsourcing sales and retention work to South Africa specifically. Brands like obviously Hollard, IAG, Simply Energy, and many others. And so I'd like to ask our panel, why is that? And if I could start with Martin at CCI, what would you say is the #1 reason South Africa is outperforming other countries, particularly in the sales and retention department?
It's the people. It's the people, Sharon. It's, as Angelo said, there's a deep talent pool in South Africa, and the people in South Africa have got a cultural similarity to Australians, and that goes beyond something corny like rugby and cricket. It's a much deeper cultural assimilation with Australians that's about empathy. They understand sarcasm and irony, which means that they can have a relationship with an Australian customer that you can't get anywhere else. So it's all about the culture and all about the people. And the success of South Africa is driven by robotics and automation, mechanizing high volume transactional activity, which only leaves highly emotional activities, which South Africans can do better than perhaps even people onshore in Australia. So it's the people.
Okay, that's the #1 for you. How about you, Howard? What's your theory on this?
Sharon, what we found is that because our accents are internationally considered to be very neutral, it shortens our training cycle. So these natural accent neutralization talents that we have create a very rich customer experience. And it's that rich customer experience that's so important. We also have a large talent pool of agents. They're not transient. There's a lot of unemployment in the country, so we really are spoiled for choice in terms of whom we're able to bring onto the teams. This allows us to do this quickly, and I think Angela referred to the speed and the glide path that we're able to adopt to bring these services very quickly in a way that enriches the customer experience.
Okay, so we've got culture, accent. I'll just ask one other panel member, their views. Daryl, can I ask you then what, apart from culture and accent, is South Africa's key to success in helping clients with their customer acquisition goals, in your opinion?
Yeah, great, thank you, Sharon. So I think we realized really early on that we had to move up the value chain. And we started seeing things like advanced analytics playing a key role in unlocking customer insights. I think that goes beyond that, though, and that's using those advanced analytics, understand the root cause of what's driving, not just customer behavior, but driving sales and sales conversions. So I think in our world, it's safe to say that we're seeing the growth in looking for those golden nuggets in using things like advanced analytics to identify what is driving customer behavior, but importantly, what's driving customer acquisition and customer sales.
Okay, excellent point. Next question I wanted to throw out to the panel. We've heard from Angelo about Hollard's journey, not only in outsourcing sales, but also customer service and claims with huge success. Martin, would you say it's a bit of a pattern for a lot of companies to start their outsourcing journey in South Africa with sales and then expand to lots of other areas once they see the results? And perhaps why is there that trend?
It is, even though Angelo did it in a different order, many of our Australian customers did indeed start by outsourcing sales. And that's not because it's simple to do, but it's simple to outsource. And I think that and Angelo did a try before you buy, but it was a very strategic plan that Angelo laid out, whereas other people are a little bit more tactical. And it's quite easy and simple to take a piece of your sales activity and try, whether or not it's true that the cultural similarity and the accent neutralization is in place. So I think most of our Australian, we've got about 2,000 people servicing the Australian market, and most of our clients started the journey on sales at the front end of the relationship. And then gradually we would move into service and technical support if that's relevant, and all the way through to much more complicated activities. And again, like with Hollard, through to claims at the back end of a process. And it might be collections, or it might be retention or saves in a telecoms environment, for example. But you're right, it's almost a risk-free thing to do, to try outsourcing to South Africa by starting with sales. And it's also less complicated from a systems perspective. You often need less access to back-end systems and CRMs and the like. So it's an easy thing to do, and risk-free. And if it doesn't work, it's quite easy to stop. And we're very fortunate that nobody actually stops. They typically carry on, and we roll into other processes.
Okay, yeah. That's great. So sales seems quite convincing from South Africa, where a lot of Philippines vendors don't even try and compete. If I could turn to service and ask you, Robin, clearly there are many companies in Australia that outsource their customer service to the Philippines, and many are satisfied, some are not. What would you argue would be the compelling reason for them to consider South Africa as an alternative for customer service work?
Sharon, I think people have already sort of iterated the fact that we have a great pool of people here in South Africa. But I think I just want to emphasize the fact that in South Africa, it's really the agent and the makeup of the agent or advisor that really makes a special difference. In the age group 18 to 35, we have in excess of 50% unemployment here in South Africa. And these agents and the opportunity for employment for them is really key. They're desperate to add value to society, and they're really desperate to be given the opportunity to support their families. So amongst the softer elements of the empathy and the accent neutralization, it's a really key part of the process, as far as we can see, that the availability of these agents who don't foresee a contact center career as a stepping stone, but a really valuable and nurturing environment where they really excel. The second thing that I think is really key in terms of a differentiator between potentially South Africa as a geography and the Philippines, for instance, is South Africa's response to the COVID-19 global pandemic. You know, I think we're pretty all aware of the severe disruptions that the Australian customer services experienced at the onset of the COVID pandemic, and specifically over the last 6 to 8 months. And I think at the outset of this COVID pandemic in South Africa, where we had a draconian style lockdown, where only essential services were allowed to operate from the office, our industry body, BPSA, the Business Process Enabling South Africa, under their leadership, the sector responded really, really well. They mobilized incredibly well. They responded immediately. And within days, vast groups of agents were operationalized to work from home. The one thing that was quite unique is that the operators shared best practices and collaborated, which in the global context is quite unique, I think, where the South African operators and the industry bodies really came together at a time of need and really learned from each other and supported each other. The operators, the clients, and the staff really pulled together against all expectations. And I think one of the beacons of hope there is that we had the courage to make swift and decisive decisions. We had the faith in our staff to honor their obligations whilst they moved from a secure office environment to work from home. And the revenue, service delivery, and jobs were all protected. And I think the response that we managed to get with the response to the COVID-19 pandemic is emerging as a defining differentiator, showing that South Africa is a real viable alternate geography to what the traditional nearshores have been for Australia, being sort of the Philippines and the rest of that Indonesian area.
That's a great story around COVID. Actually, I do want to come back to that to get some other views on it. But just before we jump to that, I wanted to talk a little bit about pricing, because that's always the topic that people are a little bit shy to ask about, but they really want to know. So obviously, in customer acquisition and even in customer experience, you know, everyone's concerned about outcomes, whether that's cost per acquisition, cost to serve, cost to acquire. And so, Robin, if I could ask you to share for the audience in Australia, what do costs look like in South Africa? And give us a sense of the difference with onshore Australian costs and pricing.
Well, our understanding is that in general, or in a broad strokes sense, that the cost per hour in Australia, across the breadth of Australia, is sort of around the 45 to 50 Australian dollars per hour mark. Here in South Africa, on a pure per hour basis, the pricing is between 17 and 18 Australian dollars per hour, which research suggests is very similar to Manila prices from the Philippines. We have sort of three models which we consider here. One is a pure pure cost per hour basis, as I said, between 17 and 18 Australian dollars. Also consider hybrid type commercial models where there's a reduced rate per productive hour with a CPA or CTA incentive to actually get back to a similar cost per hour. And then a pure risk on a cost per acquisition or cost to acquire basis where it's justified based on a post per hour glide path. So we get a proof of concept in place, we get the glide path done to prove that a certain amount of sales can be achieved, for instance. And then based on the speed to per hour equivalence, where the risk that we take as operators can be equated to what a normal cost per hour would be, then the operators in South Africa are prepared to take on a pure risk basis in terms of CPA or CTA.
Mm. And I think that sort of entrepreneurial appetite for risk in pricing might be a bit of a differentiator with the other markets. Obviously, when people are making decisions around where to outsource, they do look at exchange rates because there's often wild fluctuations over the years. And I do know that the South African rand has weakened quite significantly over the last 6 months or so versus the Australian dollar. Howard, if I could just ask you, can you comment on how this affects pricing to Australian clients, if at all?
Well, Sharon, we're very aware that, excuse me, that our customers are buying outcomes, and the outcomes are linked to the fluctuations in exchange rate because it's a risk primarily for the operator. And you're quite correct. The rand has been depreciating steadily since 2010 against the Australian dollar. But this is a opportunity for the Australian market in the sense that it allows us to have pricing certainty and pricing stability. We're also dealing with a cost decreasing environment with no sudden surprises. So it allows for a lot of certainty and pricing stability in us delivering those outcomes.
Okay, that's a good point. So I think we've heard then from the panel so far that costs are less than 50% of what people are paying in Australia, which actually may surprise many. So I think, Martin, if I could ask you, since obviously with Hollard and others, you've had massive success in this market. In terms of pricing the customer acquisition work, so do you typically price on a performance basis, fixed fees, or how do you work with your clients?
Across the whole range of pricing mechanisms. As I say, I think the days of high volume transactional activities that you outsource because of labor arbitrage are over. You'll automate that or drive it online. So we're confident in our ability to deliver the outcomes that Howard and Robin talk about. So we'll typically have models that are a hybrid, some fixed components and a variable component that's dependent on outcomes. And outcomes could be defined as sales. You know, you'll pay us according to how many new customers we might acquire. And there might be varying degrees of risk in that, from complete risk to lower levels of risk. We're fortunate that we've been operating in the Australian market for 7 years, so we understand Australia, so we can measure the risk. But we also would talk about outcomes being more customer-focused metrics like Net Promoter Score, as Angelo talked about earlier. And we would be incentivized and disincentivized to deliver better or avoid worse performance across those metrics. I think you're right, and you said it before, Sharon, that South Africa and the operators in South Africa are highly entrepreneurial, and then they are prepared to share the risk with our customers, because we're partners, as Angelo said, and we need to drive Net Promoter Score for Hollard in order that Hollard can compete in a brutally competitive market in Australia. So we're prepared to sit on Angelo's side of the table and also take some of the risk. So yeah, all pricing mechanisms you can imagine, you will find in South Africa.
Okay, so you're really walking the talk there about the partnership mentality, which so many vendors speak of, but you're actually practicing it, which is fantastic. I'd like to now come back, we have time for two more questions for the panel, to the COVID-19 issue, and perhaps get the view from two of the other BPOs on how they were impacted and how their overseas clients were impacted. Howard, if I could turn to you first, and then Daryl.
It was a very challenging time for us because, as they mentioned, it was a hard lockdown, absolutely an unprecedented test for us as a business. But as we are a blended business where we're able to incorporate digital strategies, we proceeded with a digital strategy initially because we're in the debt management business. And then our customer service components we were able to bring into the contact center as an essential service, and we continued without really any problems. But the scale of it was that we were able to get almost 1,000 of our agents to work from home in the debt management space. The customer service components came into the business. We were able to practice the social distancing and all that was required to deliver these essential services primarily to the European market. I think it tested us and showed our ability and our agility to pivot the business, and it was really well tested, and we were really pleased with the result. We weren't pleased with COVID, but we were very pleased with the fact that we were able to adapt our business and deliver these services seamlessly without risk to our customers.
That's great. Daryl, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. And I think from my side, it was an amazing experience in really trying times. To see how, and a keyword comes to mind, collaboration, to see how bodies like BPESA came together, with the government, with the contact centers, how we collaborated, how we very quickly brought compliance issues into an environment which got government support in terms of essential services, ensured that the disruption was actually minimal. But I think that, to Robert's point a little earlier, as a body, we actually saw this minimal disruption, but a massive collaboration between key parties to ensure that that disruption was minimized, and a very quick move from on-site to off-site, and a very quick adoption of digital services to continue with that, providing the services in what is really trying times, not just for us as businesses, but as you can imagine, for our employees too. And we as a business took it on as we had to look after our staff. Their health and wellness was key for us. And I think, permeated into them wanting to actually be involved and engaged and comply with what we needed to do.
Well, kudos to the South African BPOs for doing such a great job throughout COVID and enabling their clients to operate continuously and serve their customers. We've got time for just this one last question. I wanted to talk about multi-channel. Obviously, the contact center industry started with cold calling and all those things going back 20 years. But obviously it's changed a lot, and now it's much more about digital channels like chat and video and social media and warm engagement with customers. And obviously there's a lot of technology that goes behind that. So just to wrap up, Daryl, could you give our audience a view of the sort of technology innovations that an Australian business might find over there in partnering with a South African BPO, and if you feel this is a differentiator even?
Absolutely. I think we talk about multi-channel, but we talk about multi-channel, omni-channel, and today we're talking about conversational experiences. And I think from a local point of view, providing seamless customer engagements anywhere, anytime, and importantly on any channel, has become a de facto standard in our world today. We have to be meeting our consumers in their touch points of choice. Just offering services on your traditional voice or telephone environments doesn't cut it anymore. And I think we've seen a huge drive into what we call messaging first channels. In South Africa, for example, WhatsApp is a key play. We're seeing a huge drive of our customers moving their engagements into WhatsApp channels. So we're seeing a digital first type of engagement. I think we're seeing the evolution of a world moving from an omni-channel world into a conversational multi-channel world. And I think as South African providers, we are today providing services across all those channels. In fact, I like to say that we provide services on today's most popular messaging channels and any channel that the consumer would like to engage with us on. So I think it's very exciting times, and I think we as an industry are really evolving, not just with the technologies available, but where our consumers and customers want us to engage with them on. So we're meeting where they are.
Okay, thanks. And Robin, just before we move to the audience Q&A, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, Sharon, I think the increased awareness and legislation around data privacy, lead generation, harvesting has made cold calling quite tricky and unpopular. You did mention cold calling being sort of a legacy process. I think the concept of opt-in, or at a minimum, at least expressions of interest, being the minimum requirements to reach out to potential consumers. I think what's becoming a lot more prevalent through these multi-channel and conversational channels, as Daryl alluded to, is nurturing existing and known databases, the cross-selling and upselling within these known databases, and generating interest via things like social media platforms, and inviting interest seems to be more effective than the old school sort of shotgun approach of cold calling and reaching out, but getting expressions of interest and inviting opportunities to have this conversation.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Well, that wraps up our panel discussion. And so now it's over to you, the audience, to ask questions either of Angelo at Hollard or of any of the panel members. So you can either ask questions privately on the chat room if you wish to remain anonymous, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question directly. And I am going to kick off with someone who's already entered a question in the chat room. So one of the key challenges in the early days in India outsourcing was retaining agents when the hours of operation were midnight onwards. Eventually, agents didn't want to work at those times in India. What is South Africa's perspective on this? Who would like to answer that one?
Shall I take that, Sharon?
Yep.
Angelo's not kidding when he talks about the resource pool. It's almost unlimited. So we've got a couple of thousand people servicing the Australian market overnight. We've got about 3,000 people servicing the American market overnight. And we literally have lines of people every day applying for jobs across those sectors. And in fact, the overnight and Australian and American shifts are the most popular shifts because they allow people to have another life during the day when their shift finishes, particularly those young people that have children. The majority of our employees are young women and they have families to support, so it's super popular. We've never had a problem recruiting to the overnight shifts. I think that you need to get scale in order to be able to support people overnight, which we now have in South Africa with canteens and restaurants and the services in order to support those people. But we've never had a problem. And it sounds like sort of sales speak, but it's true, and Angelo can attest to this. It's it's an unlimited supply of resources. There are millions of young people that are chronically under and unemployed, but they're the most high potential BPO employees in the world. So, from a recruiter's perspective, it's it's extraordinarily exciting, despite the tragic circumstances that they find themselves in. So there's no problems at all, and there hasn't. We've been doing it for 7-8 years now in Australia, and we've never had a problem. Okay,
so the proof's in the pudding there. We've got another question that's just come through, and then I'm going to hand over to Derek, who wants to ask a question. So the question is, what would be the greatest challenge that Australian customers present, either from a sales or service perspective, and how are you overcoming that? Either Robin or Howard, would you like to address that?
I'm happy to talk to that. I think just from the perspective of what challenge we might foresee in the Australian market. And I think that's the South African operators having unique ability currently to dial into the legislation and compliance requirements that the Australian market demands. And I think a lot of the geos that we dial into or receive service calls from are a far less, I hate using the term again, draconian, but I think the Australian market is very exacting in the requirements that they have, specifically in the financial services sector, for instance, where they're very astute in how they want the law to be followed and the regulations and the prerequisite confines that operators need to operate within. So I think the sensitivities that South African operators have with understanding the responsibility and accountability that goes with that is what places us in a unique position to operate within the Australian market.
Okay, thank you. Actually, Angelo, I don't know if you're happy to answer this one as well, but can you speak to any real life challenge and how you overcame it with your partner?
I mean, some of the things that were raised then were very important to us as part of the due diligence up front, particularly understanding of our regulatory requirements, working in general insurance and part of the broader financial services industries here in Australia. There's a number of things that we require of the agents that work within our teams, of any partner that we have. Offshoring requires notification to APRA because they need oversight of it, and there's a process we need to follow there. But part of what gave me confidence in the proof of concepts piece particularly was the awareness within the South African market of our regulatory requirements and working within them as part of the training program. So there wasn't a requirement on us to have to take the team in CCI through all of those things. If anything, it was part of the presentation to us of their awareness, particularly when it comes to financial services training, awareness of advice, even the technical and technology requirements like stability, for example. The things for us that I found to work really well was, as I shared, and to Martin's point before when he answered your question around overnight work, That's what's been most impressive. Just the ability to bring on employees quickly, have them skilled and trained, and their speed to confidence being at least on par to what I would have here with my highest performers, has allowed us to ensure a certain level of availability to customers. We've not had to switch off once, even through COVID, and that's been through this strong partnership. So it's worked really well.
Okay. Stay on the line, Angelo, because Derek has a question for you if you'd like to unmute yourself, Derek.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Sharon, for organizing and for the panelists, especially those that are middle of your night. So really appreciate it. Angelo, if I recall correctly from your summary, did you mention that you did not consider working from home as part of the operational solution in South Africa? Did I understand that correctly?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And is that because of the point you just made around, was it because of regulatory requirements, or was there another reason why that wasn't considered?
As soon as we were going through some of the COVID restrictions, whether onshore or through the South Africa particularly, the option was raised to us. But I made the decision personally that it just wasn't within my risk appetite to move quickly to work from home. As part of our strategy, in hindsight, I'm thankful for it, but we had availability of 2 teams for every function that we had offshore. So there was always a fallback option. I'm very risk averse in the way that I operate, particularly when it comes to customer interacting type functions. And so we know that it's an option, but for me, it was around the stability of IT as a very specific example. I know what's available to us organizationally through partnering with CCI. I'm not as confident as to what the individuals within those teams would have available to them at home. From an information security perspective, I know what processes we've agreed, again, in partnering with CCI. I'm not really sure how that will look like if an individual is at home. So the service is available, and perhaps for functions that present much less risk to an organization, it's awesome to be able to take that up. For us, where there are a number of regulatory requirements to adhere to, we just didn't have the risk appetite to go with it at that short notice, that's all.
So I'm assuming with the COVID impact, did all of your work remain within the contact center, or did you have to do any home base then?
So here onshore, we had everyone move home within the space of 4 days. With in our work offshoring, we turned off some of it for a couple of days, like while we worked through the process with CCI, because we just had to take a step back and say, how do we think about this strategically? So there was lower service level overall, but given that we had some of the availability here onshore, there was no need to turn off any functions, which worked well for us. It meant that we didn't need to have any knee-jerk reactions to things.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question? If you could unmute yourself and comment.
I do. I've got one here, and I'm sorry to jump in.
Go, Mark.
Incredible work so far, team. Great presentation, Angelo. Really in depth, and I think the panel themselves is doing an incredible job. The question I've got is, and it's been discussed a couple of times, in regards to not only the resources, but the speed to competency. And this is where I'm probably falling short, where how does someone in South Africa, without a lot of the resources that potentially might have in Australia, speed to competency could take 2 months, when someone in Australia could potentially doing the same role take 3 to 6? Is it onboarding? Is it skill set? Is it leadership? What is it exactly? I'd love your input into it, Angela, and potentially the rest of the team as well.
Yeah, cool. All right. Thank you, Mark. So, I mean, there were a few things I actually learned through this too, because it wasn't an outcome that I anticipated in starting up the partnerships in South Africa. And it's part of what impressed me, to be honest with you. If I put it down to what I think creates that outcome, one of them has to be just cultural. So that's just a learning for me too. I just feel like in South Africa, the individuals take so much pride in being able to partner with an Australian company. Whenever I go to visit, it's a humbling experience. Like, I love doing it. I haven't been in ages because of COVID, but for me, it's one of the things that I regularly tell the team there that I miss. It's a reminder to me to how much they connect with the opportunity to work with us. So cultural is definitely one of them, the pride in their roles. From a more technical perspective, what I've found happen is that there's a lot of work in the lead up prior to bringing people into the building. So the trainers, the leaders, everyone involved in that campaign, it ensures that they're across the requirements and agrees a plan with us as to what they will do to build out those expectations, to deliver on those. So once they have people come in the door, they hit the ground running. So whereas you might have, for example, here, I'll generalize, but trainers are ready for the trainees the day the trainee walks in. We find that the trainers, when we're partnering with CCI, are ready well before then. They've got their plan, they know the people that they're going to be skilling up, they know what their skills matrix looks like, and they work to that. And the last reason why is really, I think, the competitiveness. That all of the agents we brought into our campaign want to do an amazing job. So they've got the support around them on the floor to do that. They've got the support from us, but importantly, that pride that they take in what they do stimulates them to learn to do better, much quicker. They don't, whenever I've sat beside one of them, in their minds, it's like, although I've only been here for a week, they don't see that as a reason to not be at the level you like them to be. So they challenge themselves to try to fast track that learning.
And
a lot of individuals.
Maybe I can add something. Carry on. Sorry, Mark.
No, go for it. So apologies. Go for it, Darren.
No worries. I was going to say that we need to look at the individual, and unfortunately, it's kind of like the perfect storm. Very often, we have a young contact center agent who sees this as their future, and they're very often supporting beyond just themselves, but broader families. So there's an underlying hunger in wanting to deliver, but wanting to also be employed, wanting to impart the ability to support multiple people. So you have a very young, eager person who joins the business who wants to be there. So also something to keep in mind.
No, I appreciate it. I think I've actually got a tailing question to that as well. And this is could potentially be controversial. I have no idea. So far, all I've heard has been NPS scores have gone through the roof. Performance has gone through the roof. Everything coming to South Africa has been absolutely brilliant. At what point in time does someone say, do I not shift my whole workload straight to offshore? And why wouldn't you?
So for us, that question's been raised internally. I've got Martin now, he's sort of like listening to me, but for us, that question. But I always maintain the strategy that I had up front around performance benchmarking, business continuity, and plus importantly to us here, it's around ensuring that we've got those capabilities within arm's length. So we're able, what it's helped us do though, is it's encouraged us to build out additional functions in that partnership. Whereas when we started, the intent wasn't to even get as big as what we are now. But how well we've been able to perform through this partnership has encouraged us to say, well, let's continue this. Let's continue to put more teams on with CCI in South Africa because it's working well for us. We actually have another partner within Hollard who offshored in Philippines. And when I started this, the challenge to me was, why wouldn't you just go to the same? And I shared internally what I shared with you all at the beginning. And only months ago now, the question's been reversed. And the question's going to that partner to say, look what we've been able to do in South Africa. Why don't you do the same? Yeah. And that's only taken a couple of years to do internally, which is a great news story, I think.
That's great, Angelo. Thanks for that response. We're almost running out of time, maybe one or two more questions. And I know Margot's chomping at the bit there to ask hers.
No, I think Mark asked the same kind of question in a roundabout way, but maybe I did have a couple of questions, but I can maybe ask those afterwards. So yeah, thanks, Angelo, for that great case study. It was really, really insightful. Also super interested on the training side of things. I mean, we literally send people to Manila to sit side by side to get that training done for months. So yeah, I'd maybe love to connect afterwards and hear a little bit about how you do that remotely. I suppose another question for yourself, Mike, or for the panel is around the cultural integration. So a big component for us at Prosper is including our offshore teams and stand-ups. We have weekly calibration meetings, and we bring in all of our outsourced teams into all of our company engagements, incentives, and with the time zone being so different, maybe a question mark on how we would do that with South Africa versus like in Manila, where that team has literally been integrated into the Prosper sales operation.
I mean, we do the same. So if I can just answer from our experience. So we do engage the teams that we have in South Africa. They attend our huddles, our team meetings. Fortunately, for most of those functions, they're overnight in South Africa, but they're servicing our customers during that time. So they're not having to work out of hours to attend our routines. For some of them, they do though. And they make members of their team available, or it might be that we make ourselves available to them also. So it's a little bit of a sort of flexible approach to things. But importantly, we didn't lead with those functions. We led with the ones that were like for like, that helped us build advocacy internally. And then people were like, it works for us and it works for our partner team if we do include them in all of these routines. In terms of the training, I'm happy to chat with you afterwards and share with you how we went about that remote learning. It was the first time we'd ever done it, so we learned a bit through it too. So by no means was it perfect, but we're getting some good results through it. We've also managed to build out a module now that we can sort of pick up, lift and shift anywhere for remote learning.
Fantastic. Just before we wrap up, did any of the panel members want to add anything to that remote learning angle? We just have 1 minute left.
I would say that it's important that your service provider does mirror your operational hours, and that includes the support functions, and that's what I think we try to do as best as we possibly can. Otherwise, it won't work. So to Angelo's point, we're integrated into the Hollard business, and they're integrated into ours. And you're in Australia, right? So it doesn't make any sense that we would work anything other than Australian hours.
Okay, thank you.
I think just one final note on that, Sharon, just for Margot's question was, in many instances as an operator, we also send our trainers across to our clients. So if there's a glide leading into a campaign that's going to go and there's training required, we will send one of our trainers across for maybe a month or 2 months prior to it going live and really absorb and contextualize what's required and then bring those learnings back into the L&D centers in South Africa.
Thank you, Robin. Okay, well, it's 1 o'clock, so that unfortunately brings our lunch event to a close. I hope you enjoyed it. To everyone who attended, thank you so much for giving up your time today. We'll be sending around a quick survey to get your thoughts. Also, the BPSA team who've kindly sponsored this session will be available for any additional engagements about South Africa, and I'll share their contact details on the survey email. Wishing everyone a wonderful day ahead. Stay safe, stay well, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
See you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.